The late revelations, I mean, they're disgusting. They're horrible.
Yeah.
They're, you wouldn't even want to hear them. They're that bad. People often ask me, when you were so loyal, how did you leave? This is why. This is why.
Now, are these revelations that are going out to all of the believers? Or are these going specifically just to his immediate family?
You mean right now, as far like
Yeah.
currently?
Or like these
Most-
ones that you're referring to as these disgusting ones, are these going out to everyone?
So this has been going. His disgusting revelations is what I call them. Started in 2017, 2016, 2017. Really picked up in 2018. Some of them, most of them were kept pretty in the inner circle with his family. Some of them were read to the people at meeting. And I remember sitting in some of these meetings. And I guess we can talk about that in a minute. But some of the revelations were, most of them are just kept within his family. I probably
Okay.
probably 99 to or more percent are kept just by his scribes. Some of them aren't even, dad will probably call and give a message to somebody, and because of how it is, sometimes they don't know what to do, and ultimately they just don't pass it on. Sometimes he
Oh,
says
wow.
to send messages out to the people. From my understanding, he says send this message out to the people, but they just ultimately don't. And then sometimes they do.
So who's they that's deciding yay or nay to revelations coming from the so-called prophet?
So you have it depends on what timeline you're talking about, because this whole prison communication has been a problem for years. I mean, people that are really upset don't realize that they have tried stopping it several times, and Warren Jeffs loyal followers, they always go and they get the communication going again, whether
Mm.
it's through an attorney. So this communication problem has been going on ever since ever since he was in prison. So it depends on the timeline you're talking about, and if you're talking about most recently, then I would say his mother, Warren's mother, probably has some say to do with it, but probably doesn't ultimately have say. His maybe one or two of his wives have some say in it, and then Heathen probably has some say
Right.
in it. So I would say between those 4 or 5 people, they probably ultimately decide what to do.
What do you think motivates people who are hearing stuff coming out from Warren, right? So let's say it's his mother, and she's hearing these things and she's like, I'm not sending this. Like, she's willing to defy him because she's like, this isn't something that should be shared. I'm not okay with this. She's obviously taking somewhat of a stance in that moment. What do you think is motivating her to stay?
I don't know that she has as much influence as maybe the others do, but I mean, she is 90
Okay.
years old. Her daughter might have more influence than she actually does. So dad's sister,
I
at least at times.
I heard a rumor that when Warren was first incarcerated, that it was his sister that was allowed the only communication to and from him. Is that accurate, or was that a rumor?
I guess it depends on the exact time period you're talking about. But
Okay. Okay.
when he was first incarcerated, no, his brothers. So he would call his personal scribes. So the ones that were with him most of the time that he talks about in his record and stuff. When he first went to prison, those scribes sort of continued over the next 5 years to be his main point of communication with the family and the people. And there was sort of an organized structure about it for those first 5, even 10 years, even up to 2016, 17. It was pretty structured, pretty organized before ultimately it just went off to his family, and he had this person doing it and that person doing it. There wasn't really a
Mm.
structured way it was going about. But for the most part, if there was ever a time it was just one person, it was probably in the later years. sometime between 2018 and right now.
Okay.
Interesting. Okay.
And then these people that are seeing it and are putting a stop to it, what do you think motivates them to stay still or to still continue believing that they're revelations if they're feeling like they're going to put a stop to it? This can't be a real revelation. This is too much. I'm not going to pass this along, but I still believe that Warren Jeffs is a prophet, so I'm going to stay in.
Yeah, that's a good question. I just have to look at it from the perspective that when I was there and when I was hearing these revelations, I just don't know how they make sense of everything, to be quite honest. But when I was there and I heard these revelations, I either considered them a test or I considered them true. And because I think a lot of times what's really happening is Dad's saying basically this and this and this about some of his followers, and he doesn't specifically give an instruction, go read this to him. So he might say, you know, I should go here and do this and this and this. And this is what I've been doing. And this is my standing, kind of. And the people there, because, he didn't specifically say, you go read this message to that person, even though
Right.
it's sort of an instruction to them, they just don't. They just don't.
I see.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I wonder if to your question, babe, I wonder if they look at it as, okay, this is revelation, but I don't think this is revelation that the people are ready for. This is meant to just stay with us and we'll hold this and then share it when we feel the time is right or something. But yeah, there has to be that conflict in their minds of, okay, like this is coming from the prophet, but ultimately I don't feel comfortable sending this out. So what does that mean for whether or not these are true?
Yeah, or to Jaden's point, when you said that you felt like some of them were tests,
Mm.
what do you mean by that? Like, what would be considered something that you would think would be just a test? Meaning, like, if you followed it, you weren't supposed to follow it, like it was supposed to trick you,
Yeah, I mean,
or
in 2007, when that whole deal went down with Dad saying, I'm not the prophet anymore, and
Mhm.
that was he said multiple times after it was a test, and then he did it again in 2011 with his family, and then the whole people. So um, that was a test. Guess you got
oh,
to be inspired.
Jeez.
I
I
didn't know there was a 2011
I've
one.
I've heard, yeah. I wonder, do you think he did that consciously? Like, "Hey, I'm going to say I'm not the prophet?"
I think in 2011 he did it very knowingly, very purposefully. It wasn't a long drawn out thing like the one in 2007. My opinion about the one in
Mm,
2007 is he had been in prison for some period of time. He had lost this intensity for a moment. He began to doubt himself. He sort of wondered if he sort of was coming out of his vision. And in my opinion, that brings you to a place of suicide. Just like
mm,
for him, probably worse than anyone else, because he probably is the most brainwashed out of any of the FLDS people. So, and they say tried committing suicide. So that's kind of
Mhm.
how I see that whole 2007 thing. I think he was really dealing with reality, and ultimately, he decided his only path forward was to continue in his vision.
Well, and you see as well that some of his followers, I believe his brothers, went and in a way convinced him that, "No, you are the prophet. We still love you. We believe in you. Snap out of it. You still got to lead your people." And so he had convinced his followers so much in him being the prophet that they, in a way, helped him
Help reassure him.
reassure that, yes, okay, yeah, I can do this. So,
Oh, for sure. His brothers 100% believed in him at that point. They were just trying to help him through that hard time. I mean, you can see it on video.
Yeah, which is crazy to watch that video and see them go in all of their emotional. Such an emotional video because Warren is so clearly emotional while he's saying this, and I agree with you when you say him coming out of, his fog, his vision, whatever it was. It seems like he snapped to reality for a moment there, and that it
Mhm.
was all kind of rushing out. So you can see the emotion from him, but then the emotion from his followers is definitely intense. Without
yeah.
getting into like graphic detail, when you say that these revelations were disgusting. I know everyone's wondering the same thing me because I'm a super nosy person. Are we talking like sexually disgusting? Are we talking about the way he's treating people disgusting? Could you give just a little more detail so I'm not like dying to know what was in them?
Yeah. So here's what they are. They're a mix of detailed sexual descriptions and
Hmm.
detailed murder descriptions.
Oh my.
Really,
What?
yeah. Um, and
Okay.
I'm genuine. Okay, I want to. I don't know if my sister's going to want me to do this, but I'm going to do it because I got to tell this story. Um, my sister, when Dad sent her away to live in North Dakota with us, but when he sent her away, she had been hearing these messages, right? And she was terrified. And I had been hearing some of them too, but not as much as she had. But I think she was 12. She might have been a little bit older, 12 or 13. But her message that told her to go was sort of a detailed description of her basically committing adult fornication or whatever, however you want to say that, having sex essentially, and then committing abortion of some in some sort of way, getting on drugs, trying to kill people, and then yeah, and so this is what she was sent away for, and she totally believed it. I mean, one of the things that I was as when I was in the process of leaving the FLDS, I was just vicious because this message didn't come right from Dad to her. It came to his scribes, and then they read it to her, and I was just vicious. I would, I mean, every time I think of it, I'm like, how did you guys not have the basic comprehension to not read that disgusting revelation or what?
She was told that that's like what her future was going to be, or
Or
that that's
that's
what
what she
she
had done,
had
right?
done.
No, that's what she had done.
Like he's
And
trying.
she's
Yeah,
12?
yeah.
Well, I mean, she's a woman. I mean, the fact that anyone would say that about anybody to begin with, but then to have something that explicit be given to a 12-year-old on
He
top
was
of it.
saying that this is what you did. That's why I'm sending you away because you did these things, which is just crazy.
People often ask me, when you were so loyal, how did you leave? This is why.
Yeah.
This is why.
Yeah, we were going to get into that on when you started doubting. So if I'm understanding correctly, it was when you started seeing some of these revelations and what your father was saying to his own family that ultimately opened you up to the idea of leaving.
It took a long time. I mean, I listened to some of these revelations and just some of the most depressing, scared days of my life, when I was 18, 19 years old. So it was pretty traumatizing for some of the younger
Oh,
minds there. But yeah, I remember. So I guess we're kind of skipping a big chunk of everything that's happened. But in 2017, I was, so we had already been sent away, or I had been sent to work, and then I had come back, and now I was attending meetings, and Mother was there, and we were, Dad, the revelations were pretty crazy, but they weren't like this yet. So
Hmm.
I remember this Dad sending away my sending away my mom, and it was read in kind of in public meeting, sort of like a lot of his family even was being named in these meetings as bad people. I remember a couple months went by from the time after my mom had got sent away, and it was crazy because I was totally loyal to Dad, and
Hmm.
if he was going to send her away, I was so sad about it, and it was some of my darkest days. But ultimately, I was determined to be loyal. I mean, she had taught me that, so
Right,
and
yeah.
right.
she would have had me do, even at that time when she was leaving, she would have said, you should do whatever he says to do. But I remember going into this meeting, and usually you go into meetings, and they had been getting more interesting. But you hear these scriptures, but this one meeting, I went and sat in. I was sitting there, and just we'd had song and prayer, and I was sort of just getting ready to listen 10 or 15 revelations being read, pretty typical. And this revelation starts something like, cut not thyself when mob attacks thee. And then it sort of goes into these, and I just sat up in my chair and I was like, oh my God, what is this? And he goes into a lot of detailed descriptions about people cutting other people up, and mobs attacking people, and people
Oh
taking
my.
all kinds of hallucinating drugs. He's so big on this hallucinating drug word, and just
Hmm.
all kinds of detailed. Uh, and this was the crazy. I mean, this terrified me because I would go home and I would say, "How am I any better than these people that he's been talking about? And how am
Mm.
I not next?" I was like, "Am I gonna when these mobs attack me, and am I just gonna start cutting myself up and cutting my friends up?" So it was a
Oh
pretty
my
dark
word.
period of time for me.
How old were you during this time?
I was 18, 18, 19. Maybe I was 19 by then. Yeah, 19 by then.
Still so young.
Sheesh. I mean, looking back now, do you think that Warren is on something? Like, is he mentally stable? I mean, it sure doesn't sound like it, but
Yeah, or if he's on some kind of hallucinogenic drugs himself, and that's why it's such a hot topic for him.
um,
Just saying.
I don't believe he is. I mean, unless somebody's messing with him, but I believe that it. So if you follow the pattern from 2000, 2006, it was really intense, right? All that stuff was going on. He was
Mhm.
having these underage marriages. He sort of came out of it for a sec. The raid and everything happened. In 2011, it starts getting really intense again. Well, in 2012, it gets extremely intense. And dad starts having all these visions. He's given all these revelations about the lifting up happening and the judgment's coming, and everybody being tested in every possible way. And to me, you can just follow this vision all the way from when he became the prophet to now, becoming increasingly intense. So you have the revelations he gave in 2017 saying, there was only 10 or 15,000 people left on the earth, and the destructions had happened, and they were still holding them in prison. And so he's going through this constant, in my view, he's genuinely still in this vision and these crazy things that are happening. So I guess you should know the revelations he's given, even about the murders and everything. They're from a perspective that you should do right in, if this happens to you, you should do right, and I'm doing right, and this is how you should navigate these really dark periods of time, and God's going to
Mm.
come and fix everything. So this is the perspective the revelations are given from. So to me, it's
Mm,
just a continuation of the vision that he's always been in.
It just sounds like he's getting a lot more crazy, for lack of a better
paranoid.
word, paranoid, crazy. I mean, because it went from, hey, I mean, even when I was living there and he was teaching and preaching over the pulpit, there were moments of, that's a little scary and intense. But then it goes to all of these other things where he's claiming people did things that they didn't do, and that he's just so paranoid, it sounds like, of anybody going against him, or that he loses some kind of control. It just doesn't make sense that he would say these things to people.
I think that at a basic level, I'm sure it's a narcissistic trait where he is afraid of losing control. That's probably, but I don't think he personally recognizes it. I think he's in this
Mm.
vision and he prays really hard. I think his really dark periods of time are when he sort of has conflicts with reality and somehow gets past them and decides that his vision is actually the correct thing instead of reality.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure at a basic level, there's a narcissistic trait that's sort of wants control of everything. But at the same time, if he truly wanted control, my sister, she tells me, and I totally agree with her, if dad wanted loyal followers, all he had to do was treat us barely better. And we would have never left. Not ever. Just barely better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Barely better.
And that's kind of what he was doing at first, and then he just spun out of control, it sounds like. I mean, because when I was there, he things were intense, but we weren't me personally, I wasn't being treated poorly. And so I was holding on until I reached 18 and decided that I wanted a different life for myself, but I didn't leave because I was being told that I needed to cut stuff up. Like, that just sounds so beyond what I ever could imagine.
Yeah. So was it
Sheesh.
during this period of time that is when you started having questions, or what's kind of the timeline of you starting to question things?
It started just it's just a multiplying pain essentially brought me to that point. Before I was ever, I guess I should probably tell this, before I was ever kicked out or sent away, however you want to look at it, I was living in hiding, and then I was sent back to live in dad's house, that says keep sweet and I'll pray in the creek there. So I was there
Mm,
for probably 3 months in 2016 with some of dad's other family. And then from there, it was my 18th birthday, kind of like yours. I was sent to work. I had always been sheltered by, you know, not just the community, but dad's family. So literally, it was I was sent to work for a FLDS company, but
mm,
I it was so awkward for me. The social dynamic, I just had a really hard time navigating it because you have a bunch of FLDS people that aren't near as loyal as I was, I guess. But I had never really had anything to do with them. So it seemed like everybody either treated me like, you're the prophet's son, you're this good person, we really love you, or they mocked me like, you're the prophet's son,
yeah,
type of a
Mm,
thing. And I didn't feel any in between in all my, you know, all the time I was working there, I just hardly felt any in between that. It was either you're the prophet's son and you're special, or you're a goody goody, prophet's son that's just all faithful, that thinks you're better than us. And so
mm,
I hated the environment with all my heart. And I just was trying to get by and do good long enough to go back and be called back.
mm,
But those first couple weeks were one of the biggest challenges I've ever had. Just, you know, I'd just never been in the world before. So, and not even
mm,
really among the FLDS community. It's just always sort of really closed off. So it was
right,
super weird through that time. But then time went on and I got called back for a little while where I could come to meetings. I was still working, but I could come to meetings. And then then meetings sort of stopped again, and mother got sent away. That was a super dark period of my life because dad had been sending several of his family away. Well, so what happened is mother, I went up to Idaho to do some work with my uncle. Dad had told me to work with my uncle, and we went up to Idaho to do some work. And my mother was living in Cedar with my sisters. And my uncle gets this call, and he's like, I'm going to take your mother somewhere, and you're not supposed to talk to her anymore. Your sisters are going to
jeez,
live with your other uncle, and you're not supposed to talk to them anymore. And yeah, just so he rented me a F-150 for a couple days. He grabbed a big trailer and went down. And yeah, I just I couldn't even I couldn't talk to any of them, right? And so I was just
wow,
kind of continuing doing my work. I was by myself for those couple days, and just doing my work and trying to do the best I could. And a couple days went by, and my uncle got back, and then I was just with him for about 3 or 4 months. And he went and took my mother back to Tulsa, Oklahoma. She was just supposed to go far away, and that's where they decided to
mm,
take her. I think she found a house to rent, and yeah, her and my mother and my oldest sister. And so I was sort of just in this depressed time, but myself and my uncle were still going to meetings. And so I would start hearing dad would name a lot of people in these meetings as being bad people. And cast out or whatever. And a lot of times it was his own family, right? And I got to the point where I was so scared that it was going to be mother because the people he was
Mm.
naming, it was like forever. They're gone forever. And he would name things that they'd
Wow.
Mm.
done. Like, it was usually something like they committed adultery or something like that. And one day, I went to meeting and it was my mother. And so, uh,
Sheesh.
yeah. And I sort of just knew it was coming because uh, I think my logical mind just kind of knew it was coming. But
Mhm.
I just went into a mad depression, and my only sort of comfort was praying a lot. So I was actually going to meetings with my grandpa that we were talking about earlier and my uncle.
Mhm.
But I was working with my uncle. Well, one day when we were going to go to meeting, then my grandpa and my uncle were uninvited. So it was just me.
Sheesh.
Yeah, so they let me take the truck, and I went and sat in meeting, and I listened to Dad hammer them, and
Oh my
that wasn't near
word.
that wasn't near as hard as him hammering my mother. Not even close, But I was just like, "What do I do now?" Because I genuinely 100% believed in Dad, and uh, now that he had told me these people I was working with were bad, I was out. And I knew I was probably next, but still, I couldn't continue with them. I was so, some of my brothers were smarter than me and they figured out that this was a bunch of bullshit and they just headed out. They're like, we're out. But I was just so loyal.
Mhm.
But so that week, I went back to work with my uncle, but during the week, I worked out getting an F 150 for myself, and I had saved up a couple $1,000 I put down on it, and uh, my uncle drove me down to Cedar City, and I picked it up, and I said, "Look, I'm out. It was good knowing you." I mean, I wasn't after hearing what Dad said about him. I wasn't about to keep living with him. And to me, it was all so
Mm.
real. It was just all so real. And then, so after that is when that meeting happened that I was telling you about. I went to help some of my cousins install cabinets, and they were also going to the meeting still. And I had my F 150, so I sort of had some autonomy. It was the first time I really had, autonomy. So that's when I went to this meeting and heard, cutting out thyself and this whole, this long revelation about people cutting themselves up. And it was Dad talking about, a lot of it was his closest family, just getting mobbed and cutting each other up and doing all this crazy stuff. And it made me so scared. I mean, and I was living, he would talk about how terrible the drugs were in Colorado City for some reason. And I was living there. And so
Mhm.
I was so scared even to have a knife or anything because I didn't want to cut somebody up or anything like that.
Oh
Oh,
my
wow.
I
word.
would go to bed, I would pray so dang hard, uh, just terrified that I was gonna wake up, getting mobbed and cutting somebody up, or somehow take some of these drugs and do some heinous crimes or something.
Oh my
Wow.
word.
So much unnecessary fear and just concern over such crazy ideas. That just is shocking to hear.
Yeah, and before we were talking about fear and do we do things from fear? Well, at this point, I was so scared, but there was still that aspect of me that was committed to going. To me, this was just, I was kind of in the vision with my dad. This was the end of times. This was the tests that are going to reveal if I'm worthy to go with God and my dad to the redemption of Zion and be part of the New Jerusalem and the second coming of Jesus Christ or not. These were,
Mm.
Dad had warned us for years that these tests were going to come and that they were going to, you know, uh, pull at our deepest heartstrings and they were going to be super hard to pass. So, to me, I was right there just trying to make it through. So a big part of it was fear, yes. And I mean, I felt a lot of fear through the process, especially during these revelations. But another thing is I was in a house by myself, so that kind of added to it. And I didn't really have close friends to bounce anything off of, and I don't know if I ever did. Even from when I was really young, I don't think I really had people to tell how I really felt. In some sense, it was normal, but it was just some dark days, and I was still thinking about my mother, wondering if she was somehow gonna pull through and make it back into the fold. But that went on for about 3 months, and not every revelation was just horribly dark, but there was probably one every Sunday, or then it started getting to be where there was a few more and more people were named. And you just, I just couldn't help but wonder if I was next. I couldn't see how I was somehow managing to be good enough to make it through this. But one day, one day I got a call, and dad said, go pick up your mom and get your sister. This is when my sister got her message to, the bad message I was talking about. Pick up your sister, go
Mm.
pick up your mom, go with them, and live in North Dakota and do the best you can. I went up and got my sisters that were living in Idaho, and we all headed over to Tulsa and picked up mother and headed up there to North Dakota and got a hotel room, and sort of had to figure it out from there. And my time up there in North Dakota, coupled with what happened through these dark times, because now I wasn't hearing revelations anymore. I wasn't hearing these dark revelations anymore. I was sort of in the loop to some degree with my brothers. They would call and check on me once in a big while, but ultimately I was sort of out, not hearing revelations, not none of that. And it sort of was quite a time of peace. Then in North Dakota, after about a year of peace, then shit started hitting the fan just constantly, and all kind of, I mean, I guess I can go into all the details if you want me to, but all kinds of different things happened, and one thing led to another, and I just had some really dark days up there in North Dakota. And by the time that was all done, I called my brothers that were living down in Afton, Wyoming. Ammon was one of them, and I said, I'm either out or I'm coming to live with you guys, but those are my only two options. They said, come live with us. So I went and lived with them for a while, but I had just already gone, my brain had already gone too far. I basically, to some degree, I had already left at that point, you know, and was sort of just hanging in there with my brothers for a while until I, started doing things they didn't want me to do. And ultimately they asked me, you need to be loyal to dad or else you need to go find your own thing. I said, give me 6 months. I'll be out of here. So rented me a house and moved. And that's when I was 100%.
So I have to ask, I mean, obviously we don't have enough time to go into all the details, but I do have to know if you still have had then and have a relationship with your mother after all of that.
Yeah. So all the time I was up there in North Dakota, mother was there the whole time.
Mm.
When I moved down to my brothers in Afton, then, I told mother the same thing. I either have to go live with my brothers or I have to leave. And by this point, pretty much all my sisters. So I guess we skipped a lot of stuff up there in North Dakota. But one of the things that happened up
Mm.
there was dad's daughters were his full time scribes, and he trusted
Mm.
them 100%. But they were basically had completely left. So
Oh,
Okay.
wow.
yeah, and maybe you've heard about this some, maybe you haven't, but essentially they were the people that he trusted and called, and they were recording all the tithing, and they were his scribes. They were going to the visits. They were his main point of contact. They were reading all the messages, and they were essentially had left the FLDS. And so
That's amazing.
yeah. Yeah, it is amazing. And I wasn't totally aware of this at the time, but Hedeman was sort of the main man there, but they were still the scribes, sort of. So
Mm.
they kind of worked together, but ultimately dad called his daughters and gave them the messages, and Hedeman and them worked together with all the tithing and all that stuff. So during this time, yeah, they were hiding all the stuff they were doing from Hedeman, but I kind of became aware of it through some of my sisters talking behind their backs, and so I sort of found out about it. I told Hedeman about it, and from there it just kind of all blew up. But they were kind of forced in that moment to make a decision to say, "Hey, we're either going to stop doing what we've been doing, or," because they were already dressing down. They weren't dressing like FLDS people anymore. They were going to the movies. And yet they were still in this insane mindset of being loyal to dad. It was truly insane. Talking, my sisters
Wow.
were, so two of my sisters were with them, and reasoning with them was just absolutely insane because to me, I'm just this guy that's, I've been having a hard time too, but I was telling them, are you loyal to dad or not? And they think, because everything dad said about me at this point, they think I'm this terrible person, but they're going to the
Mhm.
movies and somehow it's justified in their mind, and they're spending tithing on all kinds of bullshit.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, they're just wasting tithing. I mean, I
Dang.
don't, at this point I don't care, but at that time I cared because I was paying my tithing at that time, and I can't tell you how
Mm,
much better my life's got since I stopped. But
I'll bet.
Yeah. We had heard rumors before that some of his daughters, your sisters, that were his scribes were getting some of these revelations, and that was a huge reason why they chose to leave, is because of some of particularly sexual revelations, certain things that he was saying about what was going to happen with the women, and that they were like, this isn't the future that we want. Is that
Mm.
true as far as you know?
yeah, so these girls, yeah, these are the kinds of revelations that they were listening to every day. So when I
Mm.
say, I at the time I didn't understand why they were so messed up, because I would say, look, I'm over here trying to do my best, and you guys are out dressing down, you're going to the movies, and somehow you think I'm bad. I mean, how messed,
Mm.
And so I was aware of these kind of revelations, but I didn't know they had continued to get worse and worse and worse. So this group of girls were in a state of mind that was very, I want to say vulnerable, but also total lack of reality. 100% lack of reality in every
Mm.
way.
Yeah.
And so,
Mm.
in my opinion, a lot of them went, a lot of them went and joined some other groups, and I think that those groups kind of took advantage of them. This is my view. Those girls disagree with me today, but
I did want to ask as well. I've heard recently, and I wonder if you've heard this as well, that something Warren Jeffs has been saying in revelation form or some other form has caused that some of his followers are becoming even more faithful to him because of something that is supposed to happen in the near future, or something along those lines that is causing them to be more faithful. Maybe if they did have questions, those questions are going away and they're starting to believe even more so. Have you heard anything about that?
so I'm not super in with the current revelations. A lot of
Hmm.
members that sign up get revelations mailed to them occasionally, but I'm definitely not on that list. I mean, my brothers or whoever's up there is definitely not. I write my blog every week, and I'm sure they keep pretty good tabs on that. And I've said a lot of stuff about, I've said a lot of stuff about all of them, or not them specifically, but just the religion in general. And I know that it continues to go back and forth where people they're sort of told not to do a bunch of things. And then, so I know lately there was a revelation that said, um, something like, you should go fishing once a week and you can have ice cream now. And so that, I think that was really encouraging for a lot of people. And they're like, we're supposed to go fishing once a week now. And I, I just laughed really hard. I said, give it a few months. They'll be told they can't go fishing and do ice cream anymore. So And then after a while after that, they'll probably be told they can. It's just going to keep swinging back and forth until, a lot of people are going to end up just heading out. And maybe that's the best thing. Who knows? Uh, Maybe if dad stabilizes out a little bit in his mind, then, they'll have the opportunity to pull the community back together. I don't know, but I guess we'll see.
I've always wondered
Mm,
what Warren's mindset for sending away what seems to be the people who were willing to be the most loyal to him. And again, I don't know if it's for power, why he was
yeah,
sending those people away, like you said, like his family, like his own family that isn't committing any real sins, and he's telling them that you are and sending them away. And I'm like, he's not going to have a community left. Like
right.
he's going to send them all away. And how many people are going to be sent away and then just leave for good on their own?
Yeah, he already doesn't have a community, basically. I mean, I know that some of his closest brothers that were still with him are now just doing their own thing. I don't think they're going to be vocal. I don't think they're going to say much, but they're not doing what he tells them to do anymore because they had this same thing happen to them and their families where they were constantly pitched back and forth. They were called back and then sent away and called back and sent away, and their family was too. And all their boys were just getting messed up. So a lot of dads, I tell people that there's nobody right now in the FLDS that's willing to tell dad no. So
Mm,
from in my view, in this vision that dad continued to go down, there was points that his brothers, for example, felt like, okay, this is a test. I'm not going to do what he told me to do, and they got sent away. Or maybe they
uh,
did the best they could to do what he said, and they still got sent away. And
mm,
Mm,
so every person that offered, it is to this point where anybody that asks a question um, is entirely gone now. And the people that are in control of the FLDS right now, they're they're fluent and they don't tell dad no. They never tell him no, you're lying. When he says, you're off, getting lifted up and I came and met you, they just believe him. And that is the only people that are in the inner circle that are left. There is nobody left that stands up and says, no, you're not telling the truth. There's absolutely no one there that is that way at all. And these people that are there, I mean, I feel sorry for them, but they are unwilling to tell themselves the truth about reality.
is your mother still in it?
mm.
No, when I got the house to move away from my brothers, my mother came to live with me there, and
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
good.
I wouldn't say that she had left exactly, but I would say she's left now.
That's awesome. And how long have
Wow.
you been out now?
It depends on exactly when you think of me leaving, because essentially I almost left in 2021 when I was up there in Fargo, but ultimately decided to stay a little bit longer and come live with my brothers. So it's been 4 years since then, and 2 years, well, 2.5 2 years and a little bit more since I told my brothers that, you know I'm going to be gone in. Well, it's been 2 years and 6 months since I said I'll be gone in 6 months.
I see.
Okay. And what do you
Okay.
think is the biggest cultural shift, or what's something that surprised you most about being away from the group entirely and being on your own?
A lot of that happened up in Fargo because
Oh.
that's where I really got to know the world. It's, man, everything. Uh, you
Mm,
know, having up there in Fargo is where I really kind of got to know the world better. That's where well, one thing I would say is music. In some sense, everybody that's already, like you've been around music for all your life and you've heard all this music, but me,
Mhm.
I have every music to explore. So there's things like
yeah.
Yeah.
that. Every movie, essentially, you have to explore. A constant culture shocks, constantly trying to figure out the social dynamic and how people think about everything from religion to just their everyday lives, and just very weird mind process of trying to figure everybody out, and you know, having anybody understand you at all is extremely rare. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I assume dating is something that you've considered?
oh yeah, I actually started dating up there in Fargo, and if you want, I could tell you the story, but it'd probably be long. Yeah, dating that dating is very difficult for I think all um, FLDS boys, especially that were as isolated as I was. You know, from fourth grade, you're separated from the girls in your class, and the class separates, so it's boys and girls, and you basically hardly even talk to your own sisters. You know, so girls are a very foreign thing when you leave the FLDS.
Girls are a mystery to guys for Gentiles that have been out the whole time. We're still a mystery to them too, so don't feel too bad.
Yeah,
But I do
thank
agree
you.
though, after I left, it was hard to make that adjustment into normal society, and the dating aspect was very difficult to try to understand the correct way to go about dating. It's just I didn't know how to handle it at all. Yeah.
I let him experiment on other girls first before he found me. So just get your
Yeah,
practice in, be patient to find your
Yep.
one.
yeah. I think for every FLDS boy, dating is quite a challenge, and this is why most of the FLDS boys end up dating and marrying somebody that's from the community. I
Mhm.
have brothers, and they've all either married from the community or they've married former Mormon girls. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, something about how they get along a little bit better.
Yeah.
Personally, I just decided I didn't really want to marry an FLDS girl because we're all so related, and 90% of them are either my first or second cousins. So I just I'm
Playing
changing
it
things
safe.
up a little.
Oh, understandable.
Yeah.
Well,
Wow.
the last question that we always like to ask as we wrap up is if you were able to talk to siblings, family members, anybody who's still inside and know that they would listen to you right now, like what would you want to say to people that are still within the community?
I think there's something that really loyal members feel as they're beginning to leave the FLDS. And it's this situation where dad often says, "You don't know what you'll do when you lose the spirit of God." And if you're going to leave
Mm.
the FLDS, you are going to be walking into a foreign land, and you are going to get very suicidal thoughts at times. And sometimes it'll be good, but often it'll be very dark. And so, my counter argument to that would be that if you are caught up in a vision that you cannot see the rest of the world through an open mind, then you don't know what you'll do to defend that vision. This is why people are so loyal to, this is why people are loyal when there's underage marriages. This is why people go along with, a lot of heinous crimes in cults. Um, Once you are caught up in a vision where you don't have an open mind, you don't know what you'll do to defend that vision. And as dark as the world is, and as dark as the desert is, it is always better than being in a place where you don't know what you'll do. So another thing I would say is if you listen to Jordan Peterson, he's probably the only reason I'm even here today. But if you listen to
Mm.
him, his talk about the Israelites, they're going to the promised land, but they first go into the desert, and it's hell. Everything's hell. And the thing that I would tell people that are in the FLDS is you're not going to the promised land yet. You're going to the desert, and it will be hell for a while. That's the reality of leaving. Your entire foundation is going to be taken out from you, and you're going to be in the desert. So you're going to have some dark times, and that doesn't mean you're bad. I would say face the dark times, come talk to people that have been through it. I know that for me personally, there's very rarely a therapist or a coach or anyone that can understand. This is a journey. You do have to go through the darkest part alone. There is no one that can help you go through that darkest part. And that's unfortunate. And you should ask for help where you can. But my experience is that no matter who you ask, no matter what family you have, you will have to face that darkest time all by yourself. And when you get outside of it, there'll be family there and there'll be people to help you. But until you face that darkest time by yourself, you're going to go back and forth, and you know, you're going to be in someone else's vision and living for someone else in a life that you don't control. And ultimately, what are you going to do when you're 80, 90 years old and you look back at life having been controlled by someone else for all this time? Why not
Mm.
take the dark time right now? Because then you can look back, whether you're young or whether you're old, you can look back and say, okay, I lived the rest of my life free and doing the best I can. And I would also recommend that if you believe in God to any degree, if you can't maximize your capabilities right now and think independently right now and doubt every question right now, then how are you ever going to do that in the future? If there is a future life, how are you going to navigate that and be able to turn one talent into two talents if you can't do it right here right now? If there is a God, you should ask every question. He doesn't mind being zoomed up and looked at in every possible way. And if God isn't real, he doesn't want you to zoom up on him and look at him in every possible way. So ask every
Mm.
single question. Never put a question on the shelf. Not ever. Rip your questions off the shelf. Ask every single question. It'll lead you to dark times. It'll lead you to the desert. But in the end, you will reach the promised land, however that looks.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard thing for others to understand. I get what you're saying there, and I went through my own desert, if you want to call it that, and thankfully I did have people to support me, but there were certain times that I had to trek it alone.
And for those who are through that desert, that dark part that you guys are talking about that has to be alone and you need that extra support, please remember that there are people, if they don't have a family member out, I mean, people like Sam and Jaden,
Yeah.
you guys are now there for your siblings who are going to choose to leave, which is awesome. And there still might be people who don't have family that have already left, that there's still support. We have our email down below. You can always reach out to us. There are organizations like Holding Out Help and the Dream Center in Short Creek that are there to be able to assist in the ways that they can as well. So, like Jaden said, don't be afraid to ask for help in the ways that you can, and know
Yeah.
that there's beauty on the other side of
Uh,
those dark
and
times.
that's what I would thank you and Jade, and that was very well put, and I think gives people a lot to think about. But I do want to point out as well that there's a lot of good in this world, a lot of good people, a lot of just good, enjoyable, happy moments that you cannot experience under someone else's control, like you mentioned here. So thank you for that. I also wanted to give people a direction to find your blog if they're interested in reading the blog you mentioned. How can they find that?
Yeah, I write all kinds of blogs. Sometimes I write crazy things. Sometimes I write, pretty logical things. But jadenjeffs.com, you should definitely go and, put your email in on my website. I send an email out every week. So jadenjeffs.com.
All right.
Awesome. Well,
Awesome.
thank you so, so much for all of your insight and perspectives and for sharing your story with us and being willing to share it, because sharing your story with the world, there's going to be people who are going to hear this that are in that moment of what you were talking about, those years of, okay, I don't know exactly what direction I want to go. And the more people that are willing to stand up and say, I was able to make it through that dark time, you're giving inspiration to people who are probably in the midst of it right now. So we
Yeah.
really appreciate you.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you guys. I really have appreciated your channel. I've appreciated that you try to find the truth about things and not just you know, explode things up to make everything so bad that, you know,
Mm.
like a lot of FLDS videos on YouTube, when I was in the process of leaving, I looked at them and I was like, this does not seem accurate. So it's appreciating when you
Mm.
find a channel that tries to stick to a little bit more accurate facts.
Well,
Well,
thank
thank you.
you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for saying that. We do try to keep things, in line with how they actually were. And unfortunately, some of the facts are very damning.
And sad.
And we don't want to steer away from those either. We like to keep things real. So thank you for being here with us, Jaden, and keeping things real with us. And to all of our viewers, thank you for being here with us. And we look forward to talking with you soon.
Talk to y'all soon.